Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, E-Steam Goddess of. Hell's aspiring angel takes on a demonic dominatrix in this action-packed all-new E-Steam series adventure. Get E-Steam Goddess of in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. There's been a contingent of racist fanboys who have gotten butthurt over one of the endings of the new video game, Mortal Kombat 11. And in one of the endings of the video game, Mortal Kombat 11, Major Jackson Briggs, a black man, gets the control over the hourglass after you defeat the final boss, Kronika. And once he gets control over this hourglass after defeating Kronika, he uses the sands of time to shape time to end slavery. Now, according to these racist fanboys, this is racist. And when I take a critical look at their allegation of racism, it makes absolutely no logical sense. Because in this fantasy, the hourglass gives the individual the power to shape the sands of time. And if you are an individual who has any semblance of love of self and love of people, what you're going to do is use this cosmic device to shape these sands of times to benefit yourself. And what your Jackson Briggs did was an act of black love. And as an act of black love, he put his people first. That was the most B1 action I have ever seen in a video game, and it showed that the producers understood at least something about the whole concept of B1 action. Because, again, only a B1 thinking black man who has this kind of power is going to use that power to end a historical event like slavery, which has not benefited black people in over 500 years. Now, your Jackson Briggs ending slavery was not racist, and the reason why it wasn't racist is because your Jackson Briggs, again, was looking out for his people and putting his people first. That's what any rational thinking person is going to do. And what I find to be interesting is, in this same Mortal Kombat 11 video game, you had Baraka, a violent savage from the Jakartan race. Once you defeat Kronika with him, and he gets power over this hourglass, this violent savage then uses this power to empower himself, and he uses it to mutilate and eat people. And one of his fatalities is he slices somebody's face off and then takes their brain out and eats their brain as a fatality. And no one has a problem with Baraka having that kind of power and using it to elevate his people. But these same racist fanboys, they have a problem with Jackson Briggs, the black man, having that power to shape time to empower his people. And that's where we see the racism here, because your Baraka is a white-skinned alien Tarkatan from the Outworld, a fictional character, and this fictional character, he can have this power to shape time for his savage white race to go out here and kill people, mutilate people, and eat people. But Jackson Briggs, a black man with a sense of self-love and caring for black people, when he uses this device to empower black people, this is called racist. And that's where the racism lies. It lies with these racist fanboys who don't like the idea of a black man having power. Now, this is something I talked about in one of my live streams a couple of weeks ago called The War on Heterosexual Black Men. And I believe that this is also has to do with many people's issues with heterosexual black men. Now, when it comes down to the media, they want your heterosexual black man, they see him as an enemy of the state, and they want him to fit within their smooth world and the narratives they have regarding him. And Jackson Briggs, as long as he was this big, strong, muscular black man who could go out here and beat up all of these outworld characters and fit the stereotypes that fit within white people's smooth world, he was okay then. But when your Jackson Briggs starts to take on a B1 mindset, that's when your fanboys start to get racist, and that's when they start to get angry, because your Jackson Briggs is breaking out of the smooth world, and he is expressing ideas that refute many of the narratives and ideas they have about black men. Because when it comes down to heterosexual black men, your white racists don't mind if he's a big, strong black man, because that fits right in within their black brute stereotype. But once that black man starts to express intelligence, self-awareness, and self-confidence, and show intangibles of leadership and male authority, that's when they start to have problems with that black man, because that black man is no longer fitting within their narrative, no longer fitting within their ideas about him, and no longer fitting in their smooth world. And Jackson Briggs, a heterosexual black man who now was a father in the video game and a male leader and authority figure, he was no longer fitting into their smooth world about black men. And that's what got many of those fanboys so upset about your Jackson Briggs having that power, and then using that power to go out here and end slavery. Now, when it comes down to your Jackson Briggs ending slavery, you also have a contingent of these racist fanboys on the right, far right, calling this an SJW move. And this is not an SJW move. Now, your SJWs, they are the polar right of your far right, right-wing, white supremacists, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, and skinheads. They are the opposite side of the coin. And when it comes down to your SJW, they are just as racist, because they have the same paternalistic view about black people, in believing that they are less than and not being capable of using any sort of power whatsoever. And that can be seen in their comic books, where they have your black characters as these asexualized Gordon Good brothers, these homosexualized bumbling, stumbling idiots like Mr. Terrific on Arrow, or these very bland vanilla characters, because they fear black masculinity, and they fear black sexuality, and they fear black male authority. So this Mortal Kombat 11 definitely is not an SJW video game as related to the whole Jackson Briggs character, because I've watched almost all of the interactions of the Jackson Briggs character on YouTube, and his characterization is one of the more on point as related to a black man in any form of media I've seen so far. So what I'm seeing is that you have a contingent of racist fanboys. They are upset of the whole idea of a black man entering into their fantasy world and disrupting the smoothness of their smooth world by showing them an irrefutable example of what a heterosexual black man is like. And this is what has them all butthurt and upset, is they have to deal with a real picture of a heterosexual black man and a model of a heterosexual black man in their fantasy world. And when it comes down to a lot of these beta males and omega males and these soy boys, these three dysfunctional generations of weak men, they go to these video games to escape the real world of real people. And in that real world of real people, they don't like the idea of black men. They don't like the idea of black masculinity. They don't like the idea of black manhood, because those ideas represent power they can't control. So they go to the video game world to escape to a world where they can have their white power and they can be the most powerful person in the room through these digital avatars of whiteness and white power. So they need these video games to reflect white supremacy and the ideals of white supremacy. So they need everybody in the video game to be white, and they need the white characters to have more power than the black characters. They need the white characters to be the most powerful characters. And if you are showing a black character showing that they can have power more than the white characters, this is what makes them extremely uncomfortable. And that's what made many of these racist fanboys upset about seeing Jackson Briggs getting that hourglass and having control over that sands of time. Now, what these racists really would have been happy with is seeing your Jackson Briggs taking that hourglass and doing what Aaron Black did in his ending and just throwing it into the sea of blood, where it would fall into a bottomless river and no one would ever be able to get it again. That's what they would want to see a black man do, and that's what they would be comfortable with a black man doing, because in their eyes, a black man would not know what to do with that kind of power. And seeing Jackson Briggs, a black man, knowing what to do with that type of power, that refutes many of their ideas and many of their narratives regarding black men, and refutes many of their ideas regarding heterosexual black men and power. Now, as a writer of a character, John Haynes, who refutes many of those narratives, again, I look at Jackson Briggs' actions and I see them as perfectly normal and something any rational thinking black man would do. Because when I was writing The Temptation of John Haynes, the John Haynes character is the CEO of this Morris Phillips corporation, and when he gets racially profiled, he shows what a black man would do if given power. And in a second story that I wrote called The Man Who Rules the World, when he takes on this god Cassius to fight him to save the world from god Cassius's gem of omnipotence, he also shows the power, the leadership and position what man would do if given that kind of power. And this is again something that really makes white people uncomfortable, because the whole idea of a black man entering into these fantasy spaces and showing that he can take a leadership position and wield that type of power, this is something that makes many of these racist fanboys really uncomfortable. And this is why they try to do things to try to marginalize black characters and minimize black characters. And what they want to do with Jackson Briggs in this situation is they want to minimize him and marginalize him by saying that he's a racist, when he is not being racist. He is using power the way any character would use that power once they have earned it and achieved it. Now, another example that's in contrast is your Thanos, who had the Infinity Gauntlet. No one had a problem with this purple Titan using this Infinity Gauntlet to go out here and dust half of the Earth's universe. And the reason why they didn't have a problem with that is because those white superheroes, the Avengers, were going to go and come to take that power back. And no one had a problem with that. But everybody has an issue with Jackson Briggs controlling the sands of time. And that proves my point that I've made in numerous videos of why we as black people need to have our own African American fantasy, and we need to have our own African American fantasy platforms, because once we enter into mainstream media platforms, what they do is you have this contingent of racist fanboys who want to call you racist, when in actuality you are showing how you imagine the world. And that's the thing that terrifies many of these racist fanboys, is seeing someone having the courage to put up an image that would show you how a black person would imagine a world if they had power over it. That's the big issue people have about Mortal Kombat 11, is they are uncomfortable with the idea of a black person seeing the world from their vision, seeing the world from a black perspective, and seeing and imagining fantasy from a black perspective. This is what made them uncomfortable about Jax's ending, is seeing black people in control over our own story, black people being in control over our own history, black people being in control over our own destiny, and black people having power over their own destiny. Because in the white supremacist mind, if the black man can't do, if the black man does for himself, then he won't need him. And if he doesn't need him, then he won't be able to get his needs met. Because in white supremacy, they need a black man to be at the bottom in order for their world to be smooth. And if that black man starts to move away, that disrupts the entire idea of their world. So if that black man walks away from their world, it makes their world uncomfortable, because there's no bottom for them. And if no bottom for them where they can look down at these black people and see someone less than them, they have to take a long, hard examination of themselves, and they have to come out of their comfort zone. And that's what Jackson Briggs ending slavery did. He took all of these white people out of their comfort zone, and he put them into the real world, taking them out of their escape and making them face a reality of a world where white people aren't supreme, white people aren't the ones in power, and white people aren't the ones being worshipped as gods, because your Jackson Briggs has erased that from history. And when he erased that, he erased the whole concept of white supremacy from these people's minds. And that was a very, very terrifying thing for many of these racist fanboys to deal with. The whole idea that the foundations of their fantasy world could be wiped out by one self-aware, self-conscious black man who had a love of self enough to do what was right for his people. Because if he did what was right for his people, it wouldn't benefit those white people at all. And that's the thing that terrified most of these racist fanboys, and have them making these straw man allegations of racism when there was no racism at all in that ending. That ending was perfectly fine, because any rational thinking black person who understood the whole trauma of slavery, the legacy of slavery, they would make efforts to prevent that from happening, because that whole issue, that whole legacy of slavery, this has had a long-term damage to the entire world. Because when you end slavery, you end white supremacy, and you prevent white supremacy from becoming a religion in the world. And that's something that any rational thinking person would do, because anybody who understands the legacy of slavery and white supremacy, they would go out of their way to do that if they were a black person who understood it. So I understand where Jackson Briggs' mind was, and I understood why Jackson Briggs ended slavery, and I understand why it wasn't racist. So when I look at your Jackson Briggs from a critical perspective and his actions, they are the same actions I would have taken, and they would be the same actions any rational thinking black man would take, because any rational black man who loved black people, they're going to do what is in the best interest of black people, make efforts to preserve black people and preserve the history of black people, so that generations of other black people could learn from them, and they could learn to love themselves the way they should learn to love themselves. Now, if you want to see some positive black fiction like what you saw with Jackson Briggs' ending, I urge you to pick up my SJS Direct publications like The Temptation of John Haynes, The Man Who Rules the World, and the books of the ISIS and E-Steam series on Amazon.com by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to help me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, Isis, All That Glitters. The goddess next door takes on a bikini-clad bank robber in this action-packed all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, All That Glitters in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today.